Radio for Justice brings you up to the minute news and conversation around the criminal legal system in Colorado and beyond. Welcome to Up to the Minute.
Hi, I'm Tiffany McCoy from Colorado Radio for Justice. This week on Up to the Minute, our team sits down with Dana Flores from the National Center for Youth Law and Colorado Youth Justice Collaborative. It's a two-part conversation that kicks off now and continues next week. This is Up to the Minute. This is Colorado Radio for Justice with Up to the Minute. I am your host, Tiffany McCoy.
And I'm Trevor Jones, co-host, and we are here today with Dana Flores to discuss issues regarding Colorado justice for juveniles. And we would like to have Dana introduce herself.
So my name is Dana Flores. I'm on the Youth Justice team at the National Center for Youth Law. I'm also part of the Colorado Youth Justice Collaborative.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being here with us today. As you heard, our name is Up to the Minute, so we're trying to deal with things that are maybe really current in legislative or judicial news concerning various matters in Colorado. Obviously, yours is specialized towards juveniles. Is there anything that happened maybe with the recent legislative session or anything like really pressing that you would like to inform our hearers and our viewers about?
So this was a really exciting and inspiring legislative session, and it's just a really, to me, exciting and inspiring time to be part of the youth justice movement in Colorado. I've been doing this work with National Center for Youth Law, which is a national nonprofit civil rights law firm. My particular team, Youth Justice Team, works on basically building the capacity of people in community, youth and adults who experience the juvenile justice system when they were kids, to engage in youth justice policy, to be part of the policy-making spaces, and to create and influence justice policy wherever they may be. And we've seen a distinct movement grow in Colorado in the 5 years that I've been doing the work. And I think this year was one of the first times that we really saw that movement kind of step into our power and get some big wins at the legislative level that are really the like cumulative effect of 4 or 5 years of young people and adults and families organizing and partnering with stakeholders all throughout the state. So for me, the two biggest things were one, that we passed a bill that was inspired by young people who participated in something called the Lived Experience Advocacy Fellowship, which is a fellowship for youth 17 to 26 who have been through Colorado's juvenile justice system or who've been directly impacted by the criminal legal system during their childhood and their youth, and want to use that experience and leverage their expertise to build a more fair and effective system. Part of what young people do as they move through that policy fellowship is create their own capstone project that's a policy idea of their own design. And then they have the benefit of being able to consult with mentors and community folks and policymakers and people who can help them make that policy idea a reality. And we've been doing that with support from the Public Welfare Foundation and the Craig Scheckman Family Foundation here in Colorado for 3 years, and we'll do it again this year. It'll be the 4th cohort, and it's grown every year. It's basically like doubled in size every year. I think if we had more facilitators, if we had the funding to hire twice as many facilitators, it could double again next year. And the common theme in the capstone projects across 28 young people that have graduated from that policy fellowship has been a desire to expand community-based alternatives. So alternatives to system involvement that keep young people entirely out of the juvenile justice system, and alternatives to detention, alternatives to incarceration that give the courts and judges and other decision makers options for how to connect young people to resources, support, services calculated to reduce the likelihood that they will commit another violation of the law in the future, and also to increase the likelihood that they will thrive as youth. if I had to name like one priority that I've heard over really the entire time I've been in Colorado as an adult, which is now about 15 years, it would be to build up our community-based alternatives to the juvenile justice system and to fund them and create more infrastructure to legitimize what organizations are doing in community to support young people and to promote positive youth development. And last summer, right around this time last summer, we were approached by the youth subcommittee on one of the interim committee task forces. It's a really long name. I think it's the Task Force on the Treatment of Persons with Behavioral Health Disorders in the Juvenile and Criminal Justice Systems. Please forgive me if I got that wrong, but I think that is the name of the subcommittee. And they all summer long consider policy recommendations that feel relevant and important to them. And then they partner with organizations like National Center for Youth Law to try and draft model legislation to sort of uplift that idea at the state level. And they wanted to work on deflection, which is pre-arrest or pre-citation diversion to community-based services or resources for young people, where a law enforcement officer, an SRO, or just an officer out on their beat can interact with a young person that they might be worried about, right? They might be like seeing this young person regularly engaging in a behavior that concerns them, but they might also be aware of a family situation that young person is experiencing, or they might know something. They might just know the kid, and they might really want to do something other than, exercise their discretion to intervene with a ticket or an arrest, especially if what they're seeing happening is indicative for them of, oh, this could be a behavioral health need that's unmet, or it could be a mental health need that's unmet. I mean, police understand really well that the interventions that they have available within the juvenile or adult criminal justice system are not likely to address the root causes of a mental health or behavioral health issue. And so oftentimes they want to do something other than just give a warning, but they don't actually want to arrest that kid or to give that kid a ticket for a variety of reasons. I mean, one being that they want the opportunity to sort of be a change agent, to offer something positive and have a positive interaction. And the other being that it takes a lot of time for law enforcement to write a ticket, to come to court, be the witness. Even if it's a muni court case, they're still committing, what may be overtime. They're committing hours of their workday. And frankly, I think they don't view it as the best way that they could be spending their time. I think they would prefer to spend their time addressing more serious threats to public safety, right, than like two kids fighting at school. So it's really intuitive for law enforcement partners to invest in and really to like uplift what they already do in the realm of deflection, because it's not a new concept in Colorado. It's not a new concept nationally. I mean, honestly, it's what police tend to do when they encounter an affluent white youth who is doing something that concerns them. They're apt to refer that young person for some type of support and maybe call the parents, right? Instead of writing a ticket or moving right to arrest. So these young people sort of partnered with lots of different stakeholders, but especially law enforcement champions, and said, where is this already happening in Colorado, and how can we sort of scale successful youth deflection programs through legislation? Is there a way to do that? And we ended up really looking conveniently for me in my backyard in Longmont, because Longmont has sort of the gold standard law enforcement initiated deflection program for Colorado. They've been doing pre-arrest, pre-citation diversion for almost every type of conduct. It's not a mandatory arrest crime since the middle of 2021. They have some folks in leadership, and in particular, the then sergeant, now assistant chief, who was responsible for training all of their school resource officers, is a very data-driven person who looked at a lot of data about what happens when police officers interact with youth in the community. And what he was seeing was that the only thing that gets documented is the negative stuff, right? Not stuff like if there's brutality, if there's allegations of misconduct in how the officer interacted with a youth, if that interaction results in something that brings a young person into the juvenile justice system and there's collateral consequences from that. And what doesn't get recorded is all the times that officers interact with youth sort of in the normal course of business and they do something else, right? Like they just talk with a young person. How's your family? How's your mom? Is your grandma feeling better? Did you watch the game last night? Like all the normal kind of conversations that they have that are about relationship building and about building trust. They didn't really have a good way to document that. And so Longmont started basically having their officers document every time we stop and we talk with a young person in a school or in the community. What are we talking about, right? What information are we gathering? How do they identify? How do they describe their race and ethnicity? Instead of like me making an assumption about what that is or going with the census. Like, does it have to be that restrictive? Could I just ask the young person about that? Am I aware of resources in the community? And they ended up partnering with the city and the Longmont Youth Center, which is part of the city's Division of Children, Youth, and Families, and municipal probation, who opened up a funding stream for some more intensive, more expensive youth services, and a community-based organization that does facilitated restorative justice processes with adults and with youth. They used to be called the Longmont Community Justice Partnership, and now they're called Bright Collaborative, so same organization, but new name. So these three partners, the community-based restorative justice provider, the youth center, that, you know, sort of can unlock all of the resources and services that might be available through the city and through the municipal probation funding stream. So things like mental health support, family counseling, behavioral health education and treatment, connection to mentors, and the police department, right, all came together and said, what would happen if most of the time in these interactions with young people, we didn't treat them like criminals and we didn't focus with, what did you do wrong? What's wrong with you? And we focused instead on saying, like, hey, I think this could be helpful for you. You and your parent, sometime in the next 2 weeks, need to go and check out this place. And they're basically giving a young person a referral to show up at the Longmont Youth Center sometime in the next couple of weeks and do a fairly brief intake conversation to identify, like, do I have any kind of emergent needs right now? Does my family have any emergent needs? Are we facing eviction? And that's why I'm stressed out. And that's why I was acting up in school. There may not be anything going on, right? Like that 45-minute discussion might result in everybody going, okay, like you were just a 12-year-old being a knucklehead and like you did a dumb thing that day, but you're a good kid. There's nothing really going on. We're not going to like load you up with a bunch of services. Go be well, right? But if it's a situation where the young person can identify that their behavior caused harm and they would like to repair that harm, they have the opportunity then for a secondary referral to Bright Collaborative, where they can work with the facilitator and spend the next 3 months going through, you know, more intensive restorative justice process and have an opportunity to be in circle and like brainstorm with the person or people or community that experienced harm and come up with ways to repair the harm and all the things that go with restorative justice. Ever since Longmont PD implemented that approach, they've seen a number of benefits, some of which they didn't expect, right? Juvenile crime has gone down dramatically in Longmont. They have better officer retention. Their school-based contacts with law enforcement that are resulting in an arrest summons or citation are like 10% of what they were 5 years ago. So the school district that used to be not great when measured against other school districts of similar size in terms of like involvement in the school to prison pipeline is now basically not bringing kids into the school to prison pipeline at all.
So I find it really interesting that one of the side benefits or one of the unforeseen benefits was officer or staff retention with Longmont. Is there a connection, correlation? Like what might explain that benefit of this kind of a program there?
I mean, I think you would have to ask an officer how they feel about it, but we got to talk to law enforcement officers all over the state when we were doing kind of a landscape analysis to help this youth subcommittee on the task force last summer identify where there are jurisdictions where youth deflection is happening. There's a lot of places where there are diversion programs, but in Colorado, diversion, the term, right, refers to system embedded programs where you have to enter the juvenile justice system, and then you might be lucky and be offered the opportunity to participate in diversion. But those diversion programs are essentially like run by the prosecutor's office. So they're either run out of a district attorney's office or they're through the city prosecutor if you're in municipal court and you're going to muni diversion. Deflection, by contrast, is a guardrail so that youth don't enter the system at all, right? So more effective at preventing youth from sort of further penetrating the juvenile justice system or the adult system than diversion generally. One of the national orgs that's done a lot of research about it and done a more comprehensive kind of a national survey of law enforcement agencies is called R Street Institute. And they have a lot of good materials available online where you can read like a state by state comparison and you can hear feedback from law enforcement. And they introduced us to a program in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Safety Net Collaborative. It's very similar to Longmont's Rewind program. It's been around, I think, since 2007. And another program in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, North Carolina. And then along the way, like sometime last year, Philadelphia announced that their police department was going to be embracing youth deflection. And as we connected with like police chiefs and sheriffs, and just individual officers, they said, I want to have a good relationship with young people and their parents, especially if I work in a school or if I just work in a community where I'm interacting with a lot of youth all day. I don't want young people to run away from me, right? I don't want to be scary. Like, I don't want me showing up to be traumatic and triggering. I came into the job so I could protect and serve, not so I could frighten people so much that they run away from me, right? And it doesn't happen right away, but if they're kind of switching towards using deflection in an intentional way and not just saying like, hey, go join this soccer team to every kid, but if they have some options for how to refer a young person to get some support, and that is an option that's available to them through partnership with a community-based organization that they trust, over time, pretty quickly, young people don't run away anymore. And then when something really serious does happen, it's easier for them to have a conversation with students or with youth in the community or with parents and get the information that they need so that they can resolve that issue. And like, that's what they show up to work to do, right? Like, I don't think any officer would say, I really look forward to showing up to work so that I can arrest kids for fighting at school. That's not a good time. Especially if you have to then work at that school the next day. Now you've sort of burned a bridge with that young person where even if they were talking to you before, they're going to be a little pissed and they're probably not going to want to talk to you or trust you in the aftermath of that. And the relationship is soured, right? Where in a deflection referral, that doesn't happen. Like, you get to maintain the relationship. And I think I'm speculating, but from what I have heard, that seems to be the common thread, is that like just having an improved dynamic and having better communication in the communities where they live and work is valuable, makes the job easier.
So this year with the legislative session, you guys did have a pretty significant victory as you guys supported your organization, supported the passing of the bill that reduced beds for juvenile detention and diverted that money to these kind of programs.
Yeah, so House Bill 25-1146.
46.
The bill as introduced actually was something that a couple of members of the House of Representatives worked on with the Colorado District Attorney's Council that would have resulted in a pretty dramatic increase to the number of kids that could be locked up on any given day in Colorado, and included a formula that would have led to like an annual increase for at least the next few years that would have pretty quickly put like another 100 kids daily into juvenile detention in the custody of the Division of Youth Services at a time when the division is really experiencing some emergent issues that need to be addressed to create even like the minimum sufficient level of care or basic safety for the young people that are already in their detention facilities. And it would be really unfair to them, honestly, to like shove a lot more kids into their custody and care when they don't have the staff or the resources to take care of the youth that they already have in their detention facilities and keep those young people safe and keep their staff safe. Nonetheless, I think that there's, valid pressure sometimes from communities who want to know that somebody's trying to do something about youth crime, adult crime. Everybody wants to feel safe and everybody wants to hear about a solution. And so there was this proposal on the table that one thing we could do would be to put a lot more kids in detention. That proposal wasn't really gaining a lot of traction. I think the bill sponsors were having a hard time like getting the votes to get it out of committee. And there ended up being a really cool sort of negotiated compromise where the deflection initiative, which was basically standing up a statewide grant program to invest $10 million over the next 3 years in community-based organizations and tribal organizations that take referrals from law enforcement to provide trauma-informed and developmentally appropriate services to youth who would be referred in lieu of being ticketed or arrested when officers have discretion, right? Again, when it's not like a mandatory arrest situation, like a homicide or a domestic violence case. The idea was to stand up a program that would not only sort of fast track funding to a network of community-based organizations, but also leverage a technical assistance provider and a research and evaluation partner to collect data about the impact of the services that community-based organizations are already providing to young people that are coming into the juvenile justice system or that might be targeted for involvement in the juvenile justice system. So things like community-based restorative justice, mental health support, behavioral health support, educational support, and educational advocacy, including tutoring and helping young people navigate the public education system, which gets more challenging if you become justice system engaged. Funding is also available for organizations that offer employment support and apprenticeships, relationship with mentors and credible messengers, access to pro-social activities, short-term, long-term, permanent housing support. Like, it's not rocket science, right? Like, we know what things help young people to thrive. And those are also the same things that reduce the likelihood that a young person will be engaging in any acts of violence in the future or any violation of the law. So it's not like reducing recidivism is a different body of work that can only happen in the formal justice system. If you just interact and interface with young people in a way that focuses on the positive and offers them and their families more resources, you will reduce recidivism, right? If we have to call it recidivism. So the grant program had a ton of support. The governor supported it. The district attorneys ended up being supportive of it. Many organizations and stakeholders were supportive. The Office of Adult and Juvenile Justice Assistance, OAJJA, which is responsible for enforcing compliance in Colorado with the federal law, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, which requires jurisdictions to reduce their reliance on locking kids up. And it had very broad support in the legislature and no opposition. And so the bill sponsors that were working on that bill were able to use the momentum behind this concept of deflecting youth out of the system to bring that program in its entirety with funding into House Bill 25-1146. And there was a strike below where that bill was amended. All of the original content was basically taken out. And in its place, there were amendments that provided for kind of two buckets of work. One that has to do with creating safety for youth who are going into detention right now, who are going to be in DYS custody. So things like body-worn cameras on staff so that there's a recourse and a way to record if there's excessive force in use of physical restraint that results in injury. You need footage that captures audio and video to really be able to document that and also address it. And that's something that DYS didn't have the funding to be able to implement. So this creates a pilot where they'll be able to implement body-worn cameras in one detention facility, one commitment facility. It also and I guess this is important, it kept the juvenile detention bed cap, which is the euphemism we use to talk about how many kids are going to be sleeping in a cell tonight. We tend to talk about beds and not talk about jail. It's like, yeah, this isn't that. That makes it sound like it's summer camp. This isn't summer camp. We're sending kids into jails and prisons where they will be spending the night behind bars. So right now, on any given day, we can have 215 kids in jail, meaning they haven't been convicted of anything. They haven't pled guilty to anything. They may not have done anything wrong, right? Because they haven't gone to trial. They haven't been heard. But if it's determined that they pose a substantial risk of harm to themselves or others, or a flight risk, that's our detention criteria, then they can be sent into DYS custody. And we're doing better in Colorado. I mean, in 1991, we had like 500 young people in jail on any given night. So to be down to 215 is good for Colorado. We're moving in the right direction. We're reducing reliance on juvenile detention. That's great.
Dana, thank you so much for your time. It was very informative, and we absolutely need you back. There's a whole lot more to talk about. But for today, this has been Up to the Minute. I'm Trevor Jones.
Tiffany McCoy. Thank you for joining us on Colorado Radio for Justice with our guest, Dana Flores.
Thank you.
Next week on Up to the Minute, this conversation continues. Part 2 of this 2-part series featuring Dana Flores from the National Center for Youth Law and Colorado Youth Justice Collaborative. Once again, I'm Tiffany McCoy from Colorado Radio for Justice. Join us next week on Up to the Minute.
Up to the Minute is a production of Colorado Radio for Justice. Tune into our 24/7 broadcast on www.radioforjustice.org. Listen on the app from the App Store and Google Play. Catch this show and other original works shifting the narrative on the criminal legal system on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Colorado Radio for Justice.